Welcome to Enformed Insights, the official podcast of Informian.com and your guide to the world of public records and data analysis. Join our host, Fred Pfeiffer, as he interviews industry experts and shares practical tips for navigating the future of digital information.
Hello again and welcome to another edition of Enformed Insights. Today we're honored to have Will Albers, Senior Director of Data Acquisition for the NFL, as our esteemed guest. Will, how are you today?
Doing very well, thanks. Thanks for having me, Fred. I'm excited to be here.
We're so excited to have you, Will. It's a beautiful sunny day here in Chicago today, and the outlook for my beloved Bears is equally bright. So I'm in a fantastic mood for this conversation. Thank you so much for taking the time to chat. I'd like to start out with your career path to the NFL. Can you share a bit about your journey and what drew you into this area of expertise?
Yeah, sure. I've been thinking a lot about this recently. You get to that mid-career time and you look back and you look forward. And looking back, it's been about 20 years in this industry around data and analytics. And I really would focus on, say, the last decade, which has been more or less specifically focused on data acquisition. And depending on where you are and who you talk to, you get a little different definition for data acquisition. But at least let me explain my flavor of this. Way back, long time ago, living in the Washington, D.C. area, I was supporting the military and intelligence communities in chasing down bad guys. We were using predictive analytics to figure out where bad guys are based on where they were. When we did this type of work, we'd get deployed all over the place to major COCOMs and be told to stand up a cell to support a geography. Let's just say North Korea. Our job wasn't to sit down with a big data brick of data and start running the analysis. We had to start from scratch. We had to find all the data we were going to use in that area. We had to search through the intelligence community's data as well as open source data to start piecing this stuff together. This idea of acquiring data for analytic purpose, it happened again and again and again as we moved to responsibilities in new geographies over new geographies over new geographies. While I learned a ton, I never thought this was going to be my career path. Now, we eventually moved out of the DC area, and I focused on commercial data for a little while, working for Dun Bradstreet. And I still would do my job of bringing data from all over the place together with the commercial data to answer questions, to go after problems. Now, eventually, we left. We left and we went to Ford Motor Company. And I'm going to go through a couple of different industries here. Manufacturing with Ford Motor Company, where we stood up a data and analytics cell and helped take it to a brand new level that it wasn't before, specifically focused in my regards to data acquisition. From there, we went to retail, a big, gigantic grocery store up in Canada. Same thing, going after consumer data and external data that can go along with it. And finally, here we are in the entertainment industry, trying to work with our fans and find meaningful ways to engage with them, both with NFL data and externally sourced data and data services.
What have been some pivotal moments in your career that have shaped your understanding and approach to consumer data?
All right, so this is interesting as well. Given the idea that it's a rinse and repeat model where it came from, we talked about that intelligence community, just doing it again and again for a new geography. What I quickly learned as you move away from that space is every single organization defines the problem and their data differently. Now, we're going to say consumer data over and over again, but consumer data means different things in different industries and different companies, and it really comes down to what's important for them at each. Now, maybe we could talk a little later about the idea of counting consumers, and it can all change depending on what the operational definition is. We're trying to go after as many consumers as possible. Are we interested in those that have engaged with us in the last year? Or are we going for white space, trying to find new consumers that we haven't had in the past? All of those considerations are important to keep in mind when you're searching for or utilizing this data acquisition or external data acquisition.
What are some of your proudest accomplishments in your work?
I'm going to probably swap back and forth between the human dynamic and the professional dynamic. The human dynamic is I've been lucky enough to have teams supporting me that we've provided careers for, that we've given them guidance, and they've just developed and blossomed into outstanding data and analytic professionals. They've invited us to their weddings. They send us cards. That's what work is all about, creating an environment where many people can succeed and giving a path to that success. But if I switch this over to the professional side of the house, I'm probably proudest that somehow, some way, what I do has been recognized. Meaning that if you were to discuss this concept with any of those previous places that I worked or those that I've worked with and bring up the concept of consumer data and data acquisition, they're going to bring up my name. They understand that I am extremely passionate about the topic, and I've tried to make that journey as positive with every single instance as possible, creating what I hope is a very positive reputation.
Can you discuss a project or initiative that you believe had a significant impact on the industry or your organization?
Interesting. I think, one of the challenges here is that most of the work I do is behind the scenes. I create a consistent collection of additional data that allows other types of data and analytic efforts to really shine. It's not like somebody sits back and goes, hey, look at all that great data that came from outside. Instead, what they look at is look at the incredible identity resolution capabilities we've been able to perform with pieces of our data and external data to make it happen. Or look at the increase in our marketing effectiveness because we're now engaging with the consumer at a one-to-one level in a way that we haven't engaged with them in the past. And we see their response rates to be much, much higher than the past. So regrettably, I can't take a huge amount of credit for that, but I can say I was part of those types of engagements at every one of the companies I brought up earlier.
What are some key lessons you have learned throughout your career about managing and leveraging consumer data?
Yeah, I'm going to bring back up the topic I spoke of just a minute ago. This idea that regardless of the company you work at or the effort that's underway, that operational definition of consumer data is different every time, right? And you can't go in with the same rinse and repeat attitude. I'll give you a couple of examples. We worked for a very, very large grocery retailer up in Canada who was so proud of the tens of millions of customers they have. And as we dug in and realized that, the data isn't tens of millions or 100 million, there's something a little strange about it. We're seeing a much lower quantity of engaged consumers. You start to dig in and find out what occurred. You can't take anything that was provided to you for granted. You have to dig a little deeper. In the case of the grocery store, we found that they heavily utilized a loyalty program. Somewhere, someplace, a leader had provided a metric that said we must continually increase this number of customers. And somewhere, somehow, they kept on adding those loyalty numbers, indicating a customer. But as we dug in, we realized that there were multiple loyalty numbers out there, and they were all for the same customer. You go into the grocery store to buy something, I forgot my little tag. The grocery attendee gives you a new application for a new loyalty card, and suddenly you've got 2 loyalty numbers. Or in our cases, we learned that there were dozens and dozens of loyalty numbers. So one of the lessons learned that is a difficult one to bring forward, especially when you've been brought on to make something better. I'm going to use the really bad analogy of you've got to tell them their baby is ugly. You have to reset the bar. That lesson learned is to do it carefully, but to do it towards whatever we're trying to deliver. To tell them reality. There are this many customers that you have right now. And with what we're going to bring forward, we believe we can double it, triple it, et cetera, et cetera.
Can you share any mistakes or challenges that you faced and how you overcame them?
I don't know if I have any that are very, very strong or have a heck of a story behind them, but I think this is going to be familiar to most of the people that are in this industry. It's culture. You've got to not only change the way things are working in a data and analytics organization when you're brought on, but you've got to work with the culture that was there and not rock the boat too much. I'm going to go back to that grocery example. When you start reducing the number that people have been proud of for so long, that does not always go over well. And probably a lesson learned is that I needed to spend more time creating a trusted relationship with folks who have been there for a long, long time before I tried to step out and do the same thing I've been doing for a long, long time in changing their data and analytic journey. It's a mix of the two, and you have to go about that carefully and respectfully.
What advice would you give to someone looking to enter the field?
Don't make it just a job. I think that's the difference of many of us who have been focused in this space for as long as we have, that we do have a passion for it. And I'm not saying you've got to jump out of college with this wonderful passion around consumer data and just go share that with everybody. You will develop that passion over time. But look at these as a true opportunity, as something that you could develop passion behind. Now, you can take that in 2 different ways. Find that passion and follow it, or you can make a decision that this isn't for me, and that is perfectly respectable. I've done that many times, found different areas of data and analytics that are not my type, and therefore I'm not speaking of them today. But do find your passion And do find people that are leaders above you that you can lean on and learn from. I'll admit, my career has been filled with wonderful leaders who I look up to and have followed company to company to company. And I would not be where I am had I not identified those wonderful leaders ahead of time and stuck with them.
How can professionals stay current with the rapidly evolving landscape of consumer data?
Now I'm going to share a little bit about how the sausage is made when it comes to data acquisition. We always yearly, maybe even twice a year, do something we call a vendor landscape. We will look at the current provider of data assets and look around to see if there's anybody new, or if anybody who's been around for a little while has suddenly changed. A decade ago, some of these data assets were a little challenging. We had big companies like Dun Bradstreet or LexisNexis who really had a stronghold on some of the data assets. But as data analytics grew and data became more and more available, all sorts of other companies realized ways that they could acquire similar data. And you will find that that company that's been strong in it for a decade may be losing a little bit of progress to this small and up-and-coming company. And you'll want to be there to see if there's a better solution, a less expensive solution, a solution with less problems, or to validate that the decision you've made is still current and still the best in the industry. These vendor landscapes are needed for every new option, every new effort, as well as making sure that your renewals are in the right place at the right price point.
Can you describe the current landscape of consumer data collection and analysis, and what are the most significant trends you're seeing?
I'm going to say it's back to the basics. So I'm going to walk through what those basics are really quickly. Consumer data you're going to find in one of two ways. Well, maybe one of three ways. You're going to have your own owned and operated data that you're acquiring. We can call this zero data or possibly first party data, depending on how you're acquiring it. And that is mostly what companies will say is their CRM, right? And we've got to cleanse and validate that information, but I'm going to pause on that for 1 second. The other type of data that we tend to see is third-party data, or data that we've acquired from external bodies. In the past, that was really going with different companies that also go out and acquire this information, but bring it together in a way that is packaged at a good price point, that has consistency behind it. It's cleansed and validated. Now, I'm going to bring in another type of data that I think is very, very important. And it's still going to fall under the third party or maybe even second party data definition. I'm going to call this partnership and sponsorship data. Now, allow me to go through this just a little bit more. For all of these data types, no matter what, there's foundations that you've got to stick with. You've got to cleanse the data. You've got to pull out all those crazy characters that were incorrect, all the misspellings, and all the purposeful Mickey Mouses that have been entered over time. You have to validate the information is correct. You want to have it current. You want to make sure that if you are collecting a physical address along with the consumer's name, that physical address is standardized and the most recent address. You don't want a past date address. You want to do everything you can to keep your CRM or your consumer information as modern as possible. Now, I personally tend to lean on external parties who do this as their primary benefit to the industry to help me with that cleansing, validation, verification. And we'll do that in many different ways depending on who we're working for or what the mission is. But I also mentioned the partner and sponsor data. And I want to go over there for a little while. In the sponsor and partner space, we've always had partners out there that we deal with. And usually when you think of a partner in the data space, it's like, hey, I'll take a little bit of your data, I'll merge it with my data, we can put it together and sell a new product. I'm not actually speaking from that side of the house. I'm going to speak from the consumer of data side of the house. And I'm going to bring up the NFL as a wonderful example. In the NFL, we've got tons of companies who want to partner and sponsor with the NFL to be able to use the NFL badge or say the official sponsor of the NFL. Every one of these engagements has a data share behind it. It's part of the contract that if you're going to use the name of a big organization to somehow sell or market to individuals, that we, the name of that large organization, we want a copy of the same information. I mean, they're engaging around this big trademark. We want a copy of that data too. And we've done that. We do that at the NFL. We have hundreds of attributes of our fans as they've engaged with things related to the NFL that help us build out a wonderful picture of the individual fan and how they've engaged with football. This is huge amounts of data that we wouldn't have had as the league itself. We're not going to acquire it through selling of a ticket, but only through these wonderful partnerships and negotiating proper data shares and the exchange of insights and raw data are both the NFL and our partners able to offer more than we could alone. I'm actually going to say in this case, 1 + 1 = 3, not 2. They are going to multiply in their power as you bring the data together.
So you've been involved in this space for a long period of time. Do you have a ballpark number on what percentage of data changes over the course of a year? And I'm referring to the core data assets, the name, the phone, the email, the physical address. And do you feel this velocity of change is becoming greater than it used to be 10, even 20 years ago?
Sure. Okay. Yeah, I'm going to split it into multiple areas. I use a phrase I call NEPA, N-E-P-A. Name, email, phone, and address. The core of PII, the core of the consumer in your CRM. Each of those elements changes at a different rate. And I think this will make sense to us just as human beings. How often does your last name change? Not often. In some cases, a couple times a year, but mostly once a year if it's going to change. So that one is relatively static, but incredibly powerful when you get it right. People respond to the right name. People giggle when the wrong name is used. Now, if I move that on to, let's use email, just stick with NEPA for a second. Email is sneaky. Email is challenging. Email can get you as a company into trouble if you don't use it properly. So we do see a lot of change in emails and email domains that you have to track. I would highly recommend the use of a validation service to help you with this. You will eventually learn that there are some domains, email domains, that do stick around for a long time, that do maintain activity and not change. But there are some. Let's use educational institutions. That email address you had while you were in college. It was a great, real address while you were in college. But as soon as you left, that email address got shut down. That university's domain, wonderful. But the amount of change that happens with those emails that come out of that domain has consistent churn that is going to be different than your Gmail or others that are out there. So email itself is going to require a significant amount of attention to make sure you don't get in trouble sending it to the wrong places, spam traps, etc. Physical address. I'm probably the worst person to ask on this one, as I've moved so many times for so many companies that we deployed this journey. But I believe physical address is second as important to the consumer as name. I hate getting letters, postage, etc. sent to a previous address. My address, I've deployed it in many, many places. If you as a company send me my product to an outdated address, I'm probably not going to engage with you in the future. I might correct it, but I'm like, they always get it wrong. So I find that physical address is changing now more than ever, and it is very important to make sure that you have the most recent physical address when engaging a consumer. The last thing I'll bring up, phone. Phone is probably the least impactful for me. And what I mean by this is with people moving to cell phones, the cell phone number isn't changing as often as a home telephone number did as people moved in the past. I've had the same cell phone number since probably 1995. So we find that cell phone data change to not be as necessary as the others. We do find it relatively expensive as well. But it is an important attribute to have if you're going to rely on SMS marketing. And many organizations are pushing towards more SMS marketing as groups like Apple start to restrict what's possible with the app marketing itself. All in all, NEPA, this NEPA content, they're all very important. They're all constantly changing, and every organization must engage with some sort of external service to help keep it current, fresh, and properly tuned.
How do you balance the need for consumer data with the growing concerns around privacy and data security?
I don't. And what I mean by that is privacy and security come first. It's really how do I balance consumer data with the privacy regulations and security regulations that are by far more important to us as humans. Privacy consent goes hand in hand with everything I do around consumer data, including who shares with us, who I share with, what information I will obtain, and where did that information come from. This is not a simple game of saying, hey, look, company A has a product in their catalog that says it's a bunch of great data on consumers. Let's grab it, let's go. Part of my job is to understand not only the data is available and it's accurate, but to understand the sourcing of where the information came from and make sure it's not, well, illegal, or I'll use shady as a term. Consumer trust is a very important piece to hold on to right now. Let me use an example. I remember being at Ford and trying to convince everyone else the power of this data acquisition scenario and the diligence that's required to look into the sourcing of this information. We had a company engage us at Ford around consumer information named Cambridge Analytica. And we spent a good amount of time with them discussing their sourcing, their rights, their ability, the consent. And every answer really wasn't an answer. Every answer was a little vague, a little foggy. Now, we made the decision not to engage with Cambridge Analytica. We did not utilize them, and I personally shut them down for Ford Motor Company, only to learn later, maybe a month or two later, all the fun that popped up with Cambridge Analytica sourcing. And we were proud of our due diligence before we engaged with the vendor simply for being on the market.
What are some of the best practices you recommend for companies to ensure the privacy and security of consumer data?
It's an interview. When I'm searching for data, I'm not only interviewing the company to see if they're going to fit our needs, I'm interviewing the sales folks. I'm interviewing the account reps. You get used to this after some time of asking the right questions and see where people tend to kind of bounce away from or not answer specifically. So I tend to ask very direct questions. I want to see the sourcing of where this information came from. I want to know where consent was obtained and where it was not obtained. And I'll also state, over the years, I've become quite talented with contract review and negotiation. And I make sure when we're dealing with PII and sourcing of this type, of this impact, that there is enough limitation of liability, there's enough coverage for warranty in the case we discover that some data was obtained in a way that we probably would not have done ourselves. We'll be able to protect ourselves for any reputational risk or fallout that occurs.
Can you share some innovative ways businesses are currently using consumer data to enhance customer experience and drive growth?
Oh, sure. I'm going to call it the one-to-one, and I cannot take credit for this. I've followed a gentleman now for over a decade that really makes his career around pushing how important it is to move your marketing from the segment definition of a marketing group to a one-to-one engagement. He uses a phrase called see, know, and engage in a meaningful way. Use those as 3 different maturities to your CRM or to your consumer data. Most companies, by simply having a name or an email address because they sold something to them in their CRM, can see that consumer. They see it. You bought something from me. But what do they know of them? They barely know enough information to know where they live. They don't have that full NEPA I talked about. And they probably don't have much information about what that consumer has done outside of that single purchase event with you. So you've got to spend time to know more about that consumer, to find out other interactions that are in industries, whether connected or slightly on the outside. You've got to look into them to see what their demographics are, their social structure. Are they married? Do they have kids? What's their income look like? All of these additional data assets that can be obtained through targeted marketing directly or through the engagement of external acquisition, all of these things can help you know a consumer. They, as long as you can take this data asset and keep it mature and keep it fresh, allow you to move on to that third stage. And this is where the raw data, very highly combed, fresh data, can help you engage with the consumer when you partner with marketing in a meaningful way. To move that marketing away from that segment definition to that, hey, Will Albers, I saw you were at the Yankees game last week. I thought you might enjoy this, and this around the Yankees. Probably not going to say it directly, but based on what I know about you, I'm pretty sure you are going to respond to this. That one-to-one marketing is able to occur now through the scaling of the technologies we have available to us. So you don't have to throw a huge quantity of people at the problem, allowing what was probably reserved for very wealthy organizations in the past to be done by groups now that have a little bit less of a budget, but can do a whole lot more with it, with the specific data assets and data services that are available on the market.
How do you see advancements in technology such as AI and machine learning shaping the future of consumer data collection and utilization?
AI, I believe, to be a wonderful scaling tool. I don't believe AI is quite at a place where we can trust it to fill in the blanks. And what I mean by this is we can use AI to help us process way more information for way more geographies, way more nuances to culture and location variances to spelling and structure than we could in the past when we had hundreds of people typing away at a keyboard. Right? It provides us a tool for scalability that is something that we haven't had the option of in the past. that we should take advantage of. But notice I'm not focused on the creation of data by itself through AI, but having AI do something that people could do, but doing it with fewer people. I wonder what tools are going to be around the corner. Now, I think of AI and machine learning as ways to help us scour all of the information that's available on the net or will be available on the net. Again, a scalability of people to help us find data that we weren't aware of in the past and bring it together. So I do feel through AI, we will have new data assets available on the individual, new information above and beyond propensities, new information that allowed us to look at a person's spend and actually predict what they are going to spend on versus trying to fit them into a previously defined bucket of who they resemble. Now, it's going to take some time for us to get there. I'm not sure if we will get there in time, but that's what I'm looking forward to.
How do you anticipate upcoming regulations, such as those in the EU and California, will impact the way companies handle consumer data?
I get frustrated around this topic quite often. As a consumer myself, I have to look at how companies engage with me and my response to them. But as a representative of a company with millions and millions of people, I have to wonder about all of them and make sure that we provide the right paths for each to feel comfortable with the information we have. I believe it is important for all of us who are working with consumer data to have a way for consumers to view and correct their information and to allow them to say, forget about me, don't engage with me, or you're allowed to engage with me in these ways. Now, you can go a lot deeper depending on the legislation, depending on the country. Some countries are much more restrictive. And this is where I begin to have a little bit of uneasiness. I'm going to use a term called the creepy factor. And just a scenario here. The idea, if you were to fill out a questionnaire or submit your name and buy something, and we'll use my name here, as Will Albers, I expect that you're going to engage with me again in the future. You always do as a company. Whether you address me as W. Albers, Will Albers, or William Albers, I don't care. You're still addressing me. I'm not overly concerned about the name. I'm concerned about the content. However, in some countries, people are quite concerned to make sure that if I didn't provide you with that nickname, why are you addressing me with that nickname? That's not right. Or if I didn't give you my full name, why are you addressing me with my full name? Where did you get that from? I believe most of this has to do with the comfort level of the consumer. And while I don't agree with some of the uncomfortable that I see with some folks out there, I don't have a right to tell them they are wrong, and I have to abide by it.
Do you anticipate the U.S. eventually adopting an EU type of regulation policy?
No, I don't think so. I think California is going to be about the tightest we get. When we compare ourselves to the EU, we can look at Canada as an interesting middle ground between the US and EU, their PIPEDA structure. Mm-hmm. But I will say that we have such strong lobbying that occurs in the US. And marketing is so important, such a large industry, that too much restrictions will draw the attention of dissolving marketing share, and we'll find too much force from a corporation to the government to keep it at a minimalistic approach. It'll get stronger, but I don't think we're going to find the U.S. close to EU.
What strategies should companies adopt to stay ahead of regulatory changes?
Oh, this is a personal opinion question, my friend. It has a lot to do with the risk tolerance of the individuals at the company. My personal opinion is engage with the consumer in a way that doesn't annoy them. Right? That's such a simple, silly concept, but do so in a way that is related to the consumer. Do so in a way that they're not going to say, what is this about? Why would you ever message me with this message? And a lot of the privacy concerns we're talking about here tend to go away. The issue is, I'll say early maturity organizations love to market and market and market in a shotgun blast approach. And those are the noise that we hear about in the PIPEDA legislation. Those are the noise we hear about in GDPR. Don't be that group that creates that noise. Engage with your consumer in a meaningful way, draw their respect, and I don't think we'll have much of an issue with privacy or privacy concerns in the future.
Will, I can't thank you enough for your time today to discuss these important issues. My final question deals with consumer behavior. How do you think changing consumer behaviors and expectation will influence the future of data collection and analysis?
I would hope that more companies understand the tracking of small signals in how consumer engage with you as a product or your partners or your sponsors mean to the outcomes that companies are focused on. Let me go a little further. The fact that a young person is playing flag football and that they came to a game for the NFL. In a few years, If you're starting to see a few more signals about their continued interest in the NFL, you have the potential for an outstanding fan when they get their first job, when they have a little bit of free time or extra cash to spend it on that interest. But I'm afraid it's only recently that companies started to understand that growing a tree, that you got to plant that seed today to have a tree in 10 years. The value in doing little things like collecting those little pieces of information around youth or a fan that can drive to that identified outcome in just a short amount of time.
Thanks for listening to Enformed Insights. To learn more or listen to another episode, please visit informian.com.